Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back, everybody, to another chapter of Hazardous Technology and the Minds Who Make It. Written by Ukulele Villain and read by yours truly, Freewada. And we are back here today after a nice, big, hefty intermission. We had some crazy, perspectives going on. We didn't even have to worry about Victor this time. I don't think we worried about Victor or Powder. Like it was relate in relation to them, but it was in other characters' perspectives. And we even had Silco as one of the perspectives, trying to learn how all of that went down. Uh, I've actually seen how the author kind of like I know this is an over time project. I'm not really sure the time constraints of like each chapter intermissions between each other, but I do see a growth in writing. I'm no English major or anything like that myself, but I've had to write a few research papers in my time, so I definitely get to see the growth in language and the growth in like writing style and stuff like that. And while this has a lot of like I feel like the foundational blocks that we saw earlier in this fan fiction, this book that we've read, I can see how it's actually grown to over time as like more ideas maybe get introduced and the author probably has more things like, hey, I kind of want to try out this maybe or write it like this. I don't know if it is like that, but or I don't know if it was like that on their end. But before we get into it, we do have some chapter notes as well. So on top of that, long time no see. Update schedule has been erratic on account of school, but I've not forgotten about this project, and they did not. I can tell you that. Thank you to everyone who's been patient with me. I miss Arcane so much, and it's only been a few months since it came out. That's wild to get all of this done in a few months. Maybe that's our time frame, but either way, what a feat. I know I couldn't do that. Let's get back into it, y'all, with part 3, Underground Utopias. This is Powder's perspective. 10 years ago, she had fallen asleep in Piltover after a heist with her siblings gone awry. Powder had awoken to an unfamiliar ceiling. It had not been the wood of her sister's top bunk or the rafters of the last drop. An abundance of memories had surfaced for her as she stared as the strange roof over her face being stuck to the cushy, laminated upholstery of bar booths after she and Vi would fall asleep listening to Vi's favorite song. It was the song with the cover art of the two girls in ribbons and dresses floating. The illustrated girls were fancily painted with closed eyes and smiling faces. They were blissfully unaware that they weren't real girls and were only there to make a fun illusion as the record ticks spun in the machine, loudly proclaiming that love was a bubbling fountain that could even reach the sea. She had hummed it for years after, on the way to class, in the lavatory of her and Victor's house, on the rooftops with her legs kicking back and forth off the edge. It was a shame. She never remembered what the song was called. It had been an itch that would pop up from time to time and rankle her until she scratched it by cleaning her glasses. The ceiling of Victor's room had been stark white. So much of Piltover was the shiniest gold and the cleanest white. Powder had run away from him, but not immediately. After realizing that a night had passed without her siblings coming back for her, she had had the courtesy to poke the scientist in the nose to wake him and explain she would be departing, back to her world. She had respected him, and she had continued to after beginning to live at his side, for lying well enough to hide in plain sight in Piltover and commanding the enforcers to not attack her after her rescue from the rubble. He had startled awake, having slept in his chair and leaned over his desk. She had then explained in a messy jumble that she was going home, thanking him again for not letting the enforcers kick her teeth in. He had listened until she had run out of words, and then lifted a leather-bound notebook off his disorganized desk and asked her for something she had never forgotten. "Before you go, could you make a labyrinth for me?" "You mean a maze?" "Yes, one that I will have a hard time solving." He'd then reached for his cane, closely leaned against the wall, and stood to allow her to sit at the desk. Powder had loved to draw, and it only seemed fair to oblige this simple request since he had helped her out and given her something to eat. Vander had drilled it into Vi's head that they had to earn their way in the world, and Vi in turn had tasked her siblings with those lessons. Powder had struggled to hold the mechanical pen, being better used to chalk and charcoal, but she had not struggled to make the maze. She had started with a circle, knowing that trick from Echo. That way, it would be difficult to follow the walls. An odd angle here and there was sprinkled into her drawing. Victor had gone very quiet, eyes roaming over the labyrinth she had drawn with an absence of emotion. He had then opened a book that Powder would later confirm was Jace Tallis's confiscated journal. "You start the maze from the middle?" he had asked. "It's harder to get out than in." He had then ripped out a blank page, wrote down an equation, and held it up to her. "Do you know this?" She actually had recognized it. It was half the signs that meant plants were growing. Powder had never been to a school, but she had had Benzo. Benzo was Vander's older friend and a collector of fine-tossed garbage and old books. Echo had also been obsessed with plants for a brief time, showing her images and symbols that stuck to her head, whereas the boxing routines Vi and Vander were keen to teach never stayed for long. "There's supposed to be an arrow, and then you're supposed to write the rest of the symbols for the tiny things, the hidden chemicals." Victor had been impressed. It had been rare for someone to be interested with her skills and the mechanical creatures she built. Vi would smile and nod her head along to Powder explaining her new favorite book, but Milo made it abundantly clear what most people thought of her and what the Undercity thought of her. There was no use for her tinkered objects. She wasn't a fighter. Vi always said she didn't have to be. But once again, that was only because Vi was the best fighter in the lanes and only second to Vander. Echo escaped the brunt of the lanes' disdain because he worked with Benzo. Working with Benzo meant knowing how to pawn objects, judge value from gemstones and mines, and understand how to scalp scavenged goods and resell them back to the Pilties who had lost them in the first place. When Victor then showed her the rest of Jace's journal, the runes and the symbols familiar to the glowing ones that had saved her, he added an invitation. It was a tentative one. "I want to speak to those you live with. I believe there's a place for your mind and talents at the Academy. You've taught yourself so much already." "Like you?" Powder at the time hadn't understood what Victor was. He was from the Undercity, but he lived in a small, borrowed room in Piltover. He was an exotic bird and an oddity living in a small space in between. She had wondered if she wanted to be that. "Your differences make you strong, Powder." Because Vi's differences made life easier for her. She wasn't different. She was special. Tick-tock. 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 Gods, if only... Powder startled awake to another unfamiliar ceiling. She was also flung into the present moment as an older, longer-haired woman. The noise. Everywhere and everything, a slow hum of mechanisms and timepieces. A scream was on the tip of her throat. She had been back to fleeing from Marcus, the dark eye of the new king of the Undercity following close by, and the masked Ford riders. Ah, new nightmares. This ceiling was layered, like cords or snakes. "They're tree roots." She sat up and saw Echo was sitting at a desk to her left. She rubbed her eyes. She rubbed them harder when he was still there. She acutely felt the absence, too, of her smoke bombs, the stinging gas tanks and the astrolabe. But there was no absence from Echo, no weapons between us. She could tell he had grown tall, with a chiseled jaw and infinitely clever, dark brown eyes. His locks were longer, too. Hair wider alongside the Undercity symbol for Infinitus, painted in white ink on his dark-skinned face. On the desk nearby was the mechanical owl face he wore. "You passed out," he elaborated when she narrowed her eyes at him. Powder ran a hand through her hair. Her braids had come undone, and she was laid out on a cot suspiciously near the trunk, or root, of the tree-like structure. She had had this dream before. In her room in Piltover, Vi mostly, but sometimes Echo would be sitting in the corner watching while Powder desperately tried to move herself up from an awful, nightmarish paralysis. I passed out? She had hated to think he had carried her anywhere like a Piltover damsel. Her glasses were gone, and she had no way to rub out the voices taunting at the weaknesses gained over time. You haven't been back in 10 years, and you decided to run 6 blocks from an enforcer, and that was before you climbed a building and threw yourself off a tower. You didn't let yourself adjust. Echo was referring to the air. This much she remembered from playing games with him in the heavier and denser zones of the valley where the Zon gray was soupy. Echo didn't blink as he spoke to her. Like the mechanic, the scientist he had been as a small child, she wouldn't be able to get anything past him. Where did they take you? Give me my glasses first, then maybe I'll tell you. I can lie and lie and lie. Maybe, he said, like a man who hadn't slept in months, potentially years. That made her ache a bit. He was in his 20s, and he had clearly been to hell and back already. You should know better than anyone that if I just told you what I know, I'd have no leverage. It was the same topside as it was in the Undercity. He blinked in shock. I guess they didn't change you up there. She had pondered that question many, many times. It had rolled about her head every which way. But they changed you down here. He leaned forward, and she saw a resignation reserved for ancients. Silco and Vi have a way of doing that. A weary anger dressed the entire common in the trappings of finer clothes. She could remember all the days Vi would take a hose and spray young Echo and her down when they'd come back from scrap yarding. That boy was perhaps as dead as the Powder who had left the Undercity. Whether he was her friend or not, Powder needed answers from him, though. You won't believe any of it, and we'll be back to the beginning, Powder said. I can try. She liked that, when people at least tried. Powder pushed herself to the edge of the cot and began with the stones in Jace's apartment, waking up under the rubble, and the enforcers who pulled her out. Echo swallowed and turned to look at his shoes when she described how the enforcers nearly bludgeoned her in, but she had gotten lucky. Echo interrupted when she arrived at Victor's offer of the academy. So, you chose to stay up there? He asked her with no hint of anger or judgment. It was a distant observation, like the thesis students in the alchemical halls, mixing mercury bases and seeing the colors change. I tried to come back. Powder had been defending her choices to herself for so long that it felt surreal to be vomiting them out loud. No one was in the last drop, and I saw the glass and overturned tables. So I ran to her hideout. I saw Milo and Clagger, and I ran again. I saw them too, Echo said. Her mouth went dry at his admission. What had drawn them together when they were young? Forged their alliance of trinkets and books? It had been crying. Milo called them the Whalers. If they fell from a rooftop or scraped their knee scaling a windowsill ledge, they cried. And they never judged each other for those weaknesses. She had wanted more than anything for someone to come back for her in Piltover. But that hadn't happened, and she had stopped crying around the first weeks at the academy. She heard Victor cry once, and it was scary enough that she dried her tear ducts post-haste. I went back to the scientist, not Piltover. Powder needed Echo to know she wasn't a traitor. She had never been necessarily a good person. Decent at best was her modus operandi. It was the Undercity who had shunned her, not the other way around. He'd said I could stay, and that there was a space for me at the academy. It was probably Hextech and him lying, because I slipped into the system, and no one tried to come after me. You've come back for him? She had never told Victor this, but she had forgotten where the academy was after running up from Zone. The world had been so much worse without Vi and Vander in it. Everything had become infinitely bigger and the edges sharper. Across the bridge where enforcers lived and dragons too. She had wandered from street to street until she finally came across the academy grounds. Blue light shook, and sparkled from the windows that night. Powder chewed the inside of her mouth. You've had enough questions. I've got my own. She leapt off the cot, and circles swam in her eyes. She swayed on her feet and unceremoniously landed against him. Again. He had moved in approximately 3 motions to get her and catch her. How are you that fast? I make up the time. Infinitus. Interesting. Like an echo. Echo. I needed to leave, but I didn't mean to leave you. It felt like an insufficient explanation for everything that had happened. It sounded corny, too, like a bad sorry and a bad goodbye wrapped into a doe-eyed poem. Echo gave her the best answer she could have asked for, though. I know. Powder steadied herself. She could push herself to the limits that she set and created. That's not my only question, Echo. There was that needle-sharp stab at her heel, and her throat, and really all over her. She was walking on them. She had missed a dead man, but the dead man was not dead. And a childish part of her realized that she wanted this to be a new and better chapter of what would come. Echo, what happened to my sister? This could actually end well. It was a dangerous thought to have. I'll show you. Again, that raw wound that showed itself in an older anger and a tired twitch of his lips appeared on Echo. He showed her a hidden garden, branches of a great tree that had found the will to survive in a completely forgotten area of the Undercity. Powder was amazed at the construction of a playground, a little library, and everything that a gaggle of children and teens needed. She was not amazed that it had been Echo who made it. Everywhere, there were kids on gliders, and there were chalkboards with drawings and the signs of a calm world. And he told her all that had happened in the small space and time where they had believed Powder was dead. Vi, Milo, and Clagger had barely escaped the enforcers and ran back to Vander. Initially, a steady flow of enforcers entered the lanes and leaked into the entirety of the Undercity. Usually it was just the lanes, but even the fissures got a severe taste of Piltover boot on their throats. The situation was tense. Not a single person could breathe as Piltover mulled over what was to be done with them all. Nothing happened for 12 hours. In those 12 hours, Vi begged for Vander to fight. Echo lowered his voice at that juncture of the story. He was alert to ensure no one else heard them. Vander had gone to see Benzo. Then he whispered, I was always nosy. Couldn't stand to be left out of Benzo's work and business. For the second time that day, I got someone killed. He refused to make eye contact with her. Echo said he had snuck into Benzo's roof attic. She remembered it fondly. It was like the treehouse where she stood now. It had been filled with wonders like glass telescopes, games, and mechanical claws of Echo's imagination and engineering. He had spied Vander and Benzo talking, and then the curtain and rugs were all pulled away. An enforcer woman clad in heavy metals and a pristine suit had entered the building alone. She wasn't a foot grunt, and it hadn't taken long for a young Echo to realize why she was there. While Echo explained the deal made between former Sheriff Grayson and Vander, Powder grabbed a strand of her hair and tugged until her chunks of blue strands came out of in her hand. My daughter's gone, Grayson. What more do you want from me? Everything, Vander. They hate the idea of being there, doors closed to them. They'll never stop wanting. You were just like Victor, thinking that if you danced well enough to their songs that they'd even let you just live. She'd be lying if she said that Piltover was all bad, but she'd also be lying if she said that it ever let her forget where she came from. It was like the city couldn't wait to remind her how charitable it had been by taking her and Victor in. Don't you realize we almost threw out your golden boy, Jace Tallis, when he didn't serve our interests? Don't you know how easy it will be to replace you in the city of progress? She had also learned she wasn't the only Undercity kid to be part of their programs. She was just one of the handful who had nothing to go back to. That first week in her classes, a boy had grabbed her wrist while no one was around and hissed that she wouldn't ruin his opportunity. He had a family in the fissures who had given him up, so he could return as their hero with technology and wealth at his heels. He had tried to scare her into submission, like so many others. She had snapped. That was the first fight she had ever been in, and won. Echo continued his tale and running his hands along the balconies they passed. It only got weirder from there. I couldn't keep a secret when I was little, especially not from your sister. I told her what I saw, and she gave me a look I'll never forget, Powder. Powder stared blankly at her hands when Echo told her that Vi tried to kill and fight the enforcers. One enforcer died, and 2 kids alongside them. Vi became a spiral of herself. Silco was about to make a move against Vander, and the last drop was Shimmer, but instead, he found a lieutenant, Echo said. Your sister was everything he needed. Tough as Vander, smart as Vander, and trained by Vander. She was a mirror for his ego and his nostalgia. Who is he? He talked to Powder like he had known her for years. He was another ghost to her past, it seemed, but this one had been inherited by Vander. Echo looked her over. He then finally said, Vander lied, or at least he withheld secrets that he had hoped were gone. The dead were rising all the time. Nothing ever really stays dead. That answer pleased Echo for some reason. Maybe he had thought she'd crumble at the idea of Vander being less than perfect. Echo must not have realized that deep down in her self-anguish over being left in Piltover, there also existed the childish resentment that Vander had never come for her. The question had always been in the back of her mind. If Vi had been left behind, would Vander have come back for her? Was it because of Powder? Vander went after Silco to get your sister back. Benzo too. It was too late. I don't know entirely what happened in the fisheries, but your sister wasn't forced to serve Silco. She did it because she wanted to. The only reason she's standing against him now is because she thinks she knows what's best for us, without asking if anyone ever wanted her as king anyway. And what? Powder grumbled at him. How had the world gone through such a metamorphosis? You think they'd want you as their king instead? Their boy savior? They seem real content and fine with the shimmer in their veins and letting enforcers like Marcus grab them off the streets. What happens when Silco's gone too, Echo? Echo went silent and proved to her that he was still the more mature one, the one who didn't care if he lost one of their games. He was always able to avoid rising to Milo's or her bait. Again, she was running the thread of thought through her head. She had missed him. He had always been close to her thoughts of school and frustrations growing up. She had mourned him and waited for him like she had waited for Vi. She was feeling inarticulate and unfunny. She wondered if he had missed her too. He had said he regretted what had happened, yet regrets and missing someone felt separate in Powder's busy mind. Powder began to rebraid her own hair, huffing when one of the younger masked children ran by trying to snatch at it. They were out in the open now, a sea of leaves above them and a wonderland of a world under them. There were too many street kids around, though. There was never a shortage of them before, but their numbers had tripled in 10 years. It was like they all hustled over to Echo's hideout to whisper and point at her. When she snarled back at them and they gave her a wide berth, Echo rolled his eyes at her and ruined any fear she threw into the kids by nodding his head once or apologizing. They weren't just human orphans either. There was a Korean teenager with the widest and biggest bat ears Powder had ever seen. There was a Yordle too, like Heimerdinger, but much younger and wearing oversized goggles. Oh my gosh, I just realized who that's going to be. He stared with his mouth wide open and his head cocked to the side at Powder as they walked by. When Echo waved to him, calling him Ziggs, he darted back into the shadows of the playground made of tubes and old distilling barrels. All right, Ziggs again. Ukulele Villain, you have picked out some of my favorite characters when I play League of Legends, and Ziggs is no different. He was one of my Classico favorites. Yeah, that feels so good to have that little nostalgia kick right there. Thank you, personally. Aside over. He's had a hard time adjusting. Echo wasn't exactly speaking to her, just speaking generally. The story had clearly drained him. He was now trying to make a point by showing her snapshots of the world he had forged from the very same apocalypse she had undergone. Powder had known Echo as happier than most kids in the Undercity. He had been healthy and smart and quick on his feet. He had also, and most importantly, had explicit protection and tutelage from Benzo. Powder and Piltover had seen that the power of patronage was also not too dissimilar from how it was in the Undercity. If someone vouched for you, or believed in you, then your life was easier. Damn it, Powder. Jace Tallis never understood that everything had a price. Why won't you let people help you? Because they'll want something in return. I have too many debts. Debts to dead men and women that aren't actually dead at an alarming rate. You said she's not working for Silco anymore. Powder felt her heart leap to her throat. Her pulse was starting to go wild. Ideas everywhere. No, she took your scientist, and we think she has a plan to reverse engineer Hextech in some way. Make a weapon that will make the Kim Barons and Silco kneel to her. Then there's still a chance. I'm getting dumb ideas. Powder turned to a set of kids painting on the mechanical walls that held the tree's trunk. By her estimates, over 400 people could hide in the Firelight's biosphere. Dumb ideas. The usual ones. Hextech would never come to the Undercity. Not willingly and not by Tallis or the Council. On Progress Day, she had watched in secret from outside the laboratory window and seen Victor's shoulder hunch with defeat at Heimerdinger's proclamation that, in a decade, their inventions could finally reach people in the Undercity. In her own frustrations, she had decided to pitch a fit on a quiet corner of the Piltover Sky docks, and then nothing had gone right for her since. Hextech could give a bit of a boost to those boards. Heimerdinger would pitch a fit if he knew she was even considering what she was considering. She could distinctly hear, "Technology is not a toy. Though it can be a good gateway to introduce to inspiring young minds, there comes a time where you must recognize that these tools come with immense responsibility." Powder reasoned it was better than giving it to the Cyclops, Silco. Echo, though, surprised her again. I don't want anything to do with Jace Tallis. That's the first time I've literally ever heard anyone say that. He gestured towards a cylindrical, towering series of metal sheets. They were supporting one side of the tree. From the branch balcony, Echo must have found a magic way to slow down time because the construction was surreal. Powder could see candles at the base of a mural. The mural had faces she didn't recognize, but also ones she did. Benzo was there, Milo, Clagger, Vander herself, but also Violet. Vi is gone, Powder. She's not your sister anymore. She gave up being there for all of us to instead run a rat race working with Silco, and then make a play against him to rule the Undercity. We don't need kings of industrial might like Silco and Tallis. We don't need patrimony from your sister. No, Powder said. Echo's eyes clouded with frustration. She kept talking, trying to talk away this strange new narrative. Vi, she isn't like that. It was scary because Vi had been, but Vi could not be. Echo turned his face to the sun filtered under the tree's leaves. I'm sorry she left you. I'm sorry we all did, Powder. Vi didn't leave me. When all the colors of the world had been black, there had been that hope on the back of her mind. Vander had left her, Milo and Clagger too. Never Vi, though. Vi was always with me. She had gone to the academy and very quickly she had made enemies. What had been strange, though, was they came from an unexpectedly familiar world. Every time Jace Tallis rolled his eyes at her, or enforcers jeered and catcalled her, Powder's mind would go entirely blank and panicked until Vi's voice punched down the fear. Anytime anyone said anything about Victor, I just imagined Vi telling me to knock them back on their asses. She's a protector, not a villain. My sister wouldn't hurt me, Echo. Not you, but she'll hurt that scientist, Victor, whether he does what she wants or not. Is not safe from her wrath. No one's safe, Powder. Years ago, it had been Vi who championed for them to stop pranking this shy chemist, Huck, who sometimes came to drink alone in Vander's bar. That had been with Vander, though. Powder reached for her glasses, but they weren't there. Echo reached into his pocket like he had read her mind and held them out to her. He was something else sometimes. In reality, he had always been too special for her. She snatched the frames from him and began to furiously clean. I'm going back to Piltover. I have a plan, and I need your help. We're going to save my sister and Victor. Echo's eyes clouded. Powder, help me at least try, and I'll give you the world of Hextech on a silver platter and more, Echo. I've been on the ground floor of this technology, and I was its bloody genesis. The clouds in Echo's eyes did not clear. Instead, they became thunderclouds. He was a leader who had people to take care of, and the technology Piltover had could turn the tides. The part of her raised by Victor felt bad for offering him what he couldn't refuse. Yet, Vi's voice approved. We are switching over into Victor's perspective after a short water break. Victor remembered that Powder used to like the story about a witch who lived in a moving house and would eat pretty women, but sometimes spare the clever girls. What the fairy tale failed to mention, though, was that being clever and surviving did not always include being spared. He knew he was going to die, but was nowhere close to accepting that. Victor vowed he would be one of the clever ones. He considered this as Vi lifted him off his feet and shoved him against a wall. She wasn't exactly hurting him. Not yet. This was surely for intimidation. He was more worried about his cane that had clattered to the floor and the fate of Caitlin. Focus. 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 This warrior for the Undercity had walked out with the girl from Piltover and came back alone and furious enough to yank him off his feet and into the air. He had feebly kicked at her and realized that despite the room being filled with people, lackeys backstage, that no one was going to help him. That wasn't too unfamiliar a feeling. He tried to calculate words and ways to stay alive, but the lack of air was making him panic. Victor was dragged back to being a small boy, hiding, trying not to hyperventilate after being chased. He had bowed to these creatures who took their strength for granted. He had to bow to these creatures who took their strength for granted. Vi noticed this distant response in his face, but she ignored the hissing admonishes of Singed as she yelled, "Where is she?" Victor had seen her throw the banner of her sister forward as kindling for a bonfire she was building. But this emotion was genuine. He knew exactly who she was. He came back to himself and sputtered out, "Powder is safe." Victor had often wondered if Powder was happy, though. Vi's hands around his throat could move an inch, and he'd lose what little breathing ability he had. "Your sister is safe." He reiterated that point as boldly as he could. If Heimerdinger or the Enforcers, or any of Piltover that had been so keen on prosecuting wrongs done from the explosion that had come for her, then he would have still found a way to keep her safe. "What did you do to her? Where are you keeping her?" Vi hissed at him like she wasn't holding his fragile life in her hands and wasn't the one with the power in the situation. Again, against logic, and if Jace could hear him, then Jace would have lost it. He felt saddened for this woman. He couldn't help it. What had started Hextech was watching Jace go forward into the lion's den of the council and stand bravely and defend what he loved. Powder had once to ask him why he was so nice. Victor hadn't felt very nice in his life. He had tried to be, but complications arose at every turn. Singed wasn't getting close to the scene, but he was starting to raise his voice at Violet again. Confusing, old monster. A wheeze followed Victor's next words. "I'm sorry." There was no way to defend himself from her anger. A tragedy tied them together, and she wanted to paint him the villain of it. "I had no notions that she had a family still." Oh, sorry, that was Victor. "I had no notions that she had a family still." Victor remembered Heimerdinger's chiding tone over the dangers of inducing a child to Piltover, alongside that first conversation he had with Powder where he asked to meet who she was living with. He was uncertain whether Violet realized through his wheezing and coughing that this interrogation wasn't getting results, or that he was telling the truth. She released the clasp of her hands and he hit the floor alongside his cane. Again, Singe did not put himself in danger, but instead moved carefully to offer a hand to Victor. Victor looked at the old man's hand and refused to take it as he picked up his cane and lifted himself off the floor. Violet breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth before saying, "I'm going to find her, and I'm going to erase whatever fucked up delusions you and Topside put in her head. She won't hear me. I'm invisible to her. Or am I just the villain in her mind?" The pink-haired Atlas turned and began to walk back out to the crowd. And if Victor had more air going to his brain, he'd have left well enough alone and let her have the last word. Victor refused. "She is not a child, nor is she a prisoner." It was less than 10 words, but his own venom came through. The same sentiments had been prescribed to him even in his adulthood. People in Piltover liked to ignore him entirely, or treat him like a fragile bird that they had rescued for their own gain. People in the Undercity had seen him like a dead man, and now they saw him like a misguided victim of Piltover sympathies. It was brave to wake every day in the city of progress as an outsider and demand to dream. Powder was unhappy most days in the academy, but she had stayed and she had worked to prove them all wrong. They both had. "If you go after her, and you are unhappy with your living martyr as she is now, do not be surprised when dragging her back by her braids doesn't work." The sister this woman was looking for had become a multi-dimensional inventor who had detested authority and who would not easily bend. He delivered his words to her while leaning on a cane and almost in a whisper, and this was still enough to make her pause at the alcove, back to the world where she was champion and hero. She remained with her back to him. "If she cares enough about you, then she'll come back with me. That's all I need to make her see the truth. Just one chance, and she'll see." Victor was returned to the deep lab by Singed. They had remained silent for the entire elevator ride, and the old chemist let Victor sit in a backed chair to view the strange ocean's floor outside the portcullis. Victor squeezed the lower handle of his cane. He was going to escape, and he was going to live. In the water's depths, the gargantuan sharks moved, sinewy bodies that traveled the water easily and with a knowledge that there was no danger to them. He compartmentalized everything he had learned of the facility and was already preparing. "I want to see what Powder becomes. I want to help Zone. I want to live. Damn it. I want to live long enough to stop this woman and Silco and Singed from destroying this world." Singed cleared his throat. Victor would not turn to face him. "I know you do not want my help, so take my advice instead. I see a prisoner sitting on his lone key." Victor continued to ignore him, keeping his eyes directly forward while Singe pulled a small table next to his chair. In the corner of his eye, Victor could see a tripod and an arcane gem in its core. Under the tripod was a series of crumpled papers, some of which were Jace's work. A lot of the pages were Victor and Powder's. "There's a cot for you to rest on. I will be close by should your condition worsen." And the man left Victor. They all expected him to be too afraid to run, perhaps. When he was sure Singe would not return, he slowly turned his gaze to what documents and tools Violet had stolen. The Arcane could be dangerous. Powder knew that best from Jace's apartment cave-in. She also knew it well from the lab accident she had saved Jace from. "Do you not think you're nice, Powder?" "Me? Nice? What would the world come to if I were nice?" They had been desperately trying to refine the arcane gems into a less hostile and more manageable form. Powder had been for the idea, but she had grown increasingly stressed and nervous each time the tests occurred. She refused to talk to him about it and would disappear into her room to blare the gramophone. This had been shortly after she had turned 16, and begun to spend even more time in the laboratory proper. Jace had been leaning too close and applying too much pressure via the control switches to a series of 4 crystals levitating in the testing cylinder. Powder hadn't phrased her warning at Jace diplomatically. Of course, her goal probably to get under his skin more than help. And Jace had spit back angrily at her, of course, not noticing that the glowing blue lights around the crystals weren't maintaining equidistant from the safety perimeter. Victor had only realized what was happening looking up from his desk at the perfect moment to see Powder scream, "Talus!" She had leapt and slammed into Jace an instant before the Christology had become unstable, and the room, with its high academy walls, had flashed with an explosion that blew apart the windows and sent Victor and Sky tumbling into one another. It had been a mistake like that from the early days of their research. They had all decided to not tell Heimerdinger. Powder had shouted at Jace for the rest of the day. Sky had been the one to ask Powder how she knew that the crystals would react like that. Powder had started to angrily rub her glasses and make a joke. Later that night, Powder had finally told Victor the truth. She had seen the same effect when Jace's apartment had exploded in her youth. This magic can be dangerous, but it could save me. That had always been the risk with the Arcane. Victor's hands began to sort and read. Some of Sky's work was also stolen and in the pile. This is something older than me. Something that understands the tides of the world. Victor stared into the Arcane. He coughed and felt blood dribble down his nose. The decaying process was worsening. But the Arcane. He began to sketch onto the pages of notes. He wasn't sure where he'd picked up the charcoal. A dodecahedron shape took form onto the page, and a hope blossomed. And that, my friends, was the end of Part 3, Underground Utopias. Okay, all right. I love the little introduction of Ziggs. If Ukulele, if you hear this part specifically, if there is a Ziggs specific fan fiction that you've made, I'm gonna go read that instantly. I'll probably do a reading of it too anyway, but I'm probably just gonna go read it myself anyway because I love Ziggs. And all I could think about is me and my brother playing League of Legends 10, 15 years ago or whatever, and me playing some Ziggs in the mid lane, my brother playing some Singed in the top lane, and like all of this is just like doing a wave of nostalgia for me now, just for playing a video game. Again, this isn't even getting into the show or anything like that. This is just like, this is such a nice like pullback to my late childhood, I suppose. And so it's just like, I don't know, it's bringing back a lot of emotions for me internally. And to see all of these characters that are like a little different in the way that I thought of when I first read like Vi's lore. I knew she was an enforcer. I know she was kind of but I saw her as a Piltover person. Like I saw her as like from Piltover instead, and like was just one of the heavier brute enforcers of that, like with Caitlyn and stuff. But instead, this shows like Vi may have been an enforcer for like Silco and stuff like that, and Caitlyn from a topside like sheriff's level. Like they have two different whole like worlds that they've come from, not from this same academy I thought it would have been. And Jinx, like all I could think of is like Caitlyn, Vi, everyone after Jinx, and this has come so true. But at the same time, it's like, well, I thought Jinx was just this chaotic wild child that just wanted explosions, nothing else. But instead, it's like, hey, Jinx has all of this, Powder has all of this stuff going on around her, all of these issues, and everyone dislikes her because she doesn't belong in either world at this point, and that's really why they're gunning after her. And this chaos and ensuing stuff is her just surviving at that point, not really just here to cause chaos. So it's really cool to learn like everyone's different stories and stuff like that. Echo, that feels about right for him. He is the guy that's like, I'm going to take on any Titan. I've got the power of time on my side, so as long as it takes, I don't know. Y'all, this has been so fun. I'm excited for the next section of part 3. So let's dive right on into it at next time. So make sure to stay beautiful, stay hydrated, and we'll see you in the next chapter.